Good afternoon. Hope you are able to hear. Actually, this is the second class on research methodology after the introduction. Sorry, initially I apologize because I'm having a bad throat, so I won't be able to speak loudly. So try to cooperate for today's class at least. Okay. So now we are starting with this second class. So in the first three classes which I took the introduction part of module A, in which I covered objectives, type of research, motivation, objective research method versus methodology, types of research, descriptive, analytical, applied, fundamental, quantitative, qualitative, conceptual versus empirical, stages of research in details, and then research philosophy, theory development. So research. So these all we covered in the initial classes, and then again we revised this in the last class. Sorry, I hope you are able to hear. Today I'm having a throat. Once again, repeat and just cooperate what to do. Module B. So we enter into the module B, which is research and publication ethics, in which I'm taking the research part. And what does it cover? This is the whole syllabus, which is available with you. Research formulation and design. Today's class will cover defining and formulating the research problem, selecting the problem, necessity of defining. So on research problem, we'll do today's class. So what is the definition of a research problem? In research process, the first and the foremost step happens to be that of selecting and properly defining a research problem. So first, the work which every researcher has to do is to define, select, and then define it. Define the research problem. So during my PhD, I will explain it just with one analogy. We will go on. Otherwise, it is very difficult because it's these all these what we are teaching are very general, so that it is common for each and every one of you and also for me. So during my PhD, when I initiated PhD, so I have to define the research problem. So we have to select it. Although my selection depended a lot on the organization demands, so selected my topic was development of catalysts for energy and environmental related reactions, in which specifically my job was to develop a catalyst for some high temperature reactions in large scale. So this topic and the one which we are doing was, the topic was quite broad, means development of catalysts for energy and environment related reactions. While the problem which I defined and selected was quite specific. So, but under those umbrella, under that broad umbrella, I did a lot of research on many catalysts and for multiple reactions because I kept the title broad. So this I will, so that was a high temperature reaction, the catalyst which I have to develop. And since it was high temperature reaction, the things which we have to establish was development of the catalyst, its activity to maximize the activity, its stability to maximize the stability, the mechanistic aspect to find out the mechanism, that is the factors which increases the reaction rate, and also the factors that decrease the reaction rate. So all these things has to be established, and we did it with a wide range of studies and data collection. But the topic was much broader. Slowly we funneled it out and selected at the end of my research. I proposed one catalyst, and the catalyst has been used even in plant level. So this is how my PhD work evolved, and each of one of you can correlate your work, how things are evolving since we have defined the research problem. So how we will find the research problem? So this is how a researcher must find the problem, formulate it so that it becomes susceptible to research. This is the first and foremost criteria for problem selection. How the analogy looks like? Here we have some analogy. This is something like a medical doctor. Imagine that you are a doctor, a researcher must examine all the symptoms presented to him or observed by him concerning a problem before he can diagnose it. Okay, so during problem selection, you behave like a doctor and you examine all the symptoms that your problem is related to, and then only you can do a proper research or diagnose it. To define a problem correctly, a researcher must know what it must know what a problem is. So first criteria which you have to follow is you have to define the problem and know what the problem is. So this is the first stage you research and define the research problem. Now, what is a research problem? The term problem means a question or an issue to be examined. So, as you all know, the problem term is very general. So, we have so many problems in our lives which we continuously solve. Similarly, for a PhD, we have to create a problem, means a problem or an issue which we are going to solve. So, how you are going to get that problem? So, research problem refers to some difficulty or need which a researcher experiences in the context of either theoretical or practical situation and wants to obtain solution for the same. So this is how a research problem is defined for a researcher. It refers to some difficulty or need which a researcher experiences in the context of either theoretical or practical situation and wants to obtain a solution for the same. There must be some objective or multiple objectives to be attained. If one wants nothing, one cannot. If one wants nothing, one cannot have a problem. So first is that you have to want some problem. Okay, if you do not have or cannot have a problem, you cannot solve it. Means you cannot do the research. Okay, so some objective has to be attained. There must be alternative means for obtaining the objectives. So for obtaining the objective, once you define the problem and the objectives you want to reach, there are multiple ways by which you can approach. Okay, some one way or two way or multiple ways. So you have to find the ways by which you can solve the research problem or the objectives of your research. There must remain some doubt in the mind of a researcher with regard to selection of alternatives. So while selecting the alternatives, doubts will come, and this means that researcher must answer the question concerning the relative efficiency of the possible alternatives. Means, if the meaning is given in the next bolded paragraph, is that a research problem is one which requires a researcher to find out the best solution for a given problem. Means you have identified a problem. Okay. There are multiple ways by which the objective can be solved. Okay, the problem can be solved. But you have to find out the best solution of that given problem. So that is your task. That is our task while doing research. That is, which means to find out by which course of action the objective can be attained optimally in the context of a given environment. So in a given environment, which action is appropriate to achieve the objective or the solution to the problem which you have proposed. Okay. So I told you that my work was to develop a catalyst for a high temperature reaction. So I have that catalyst. There are so many materials in the world which can act as a catalyst, but which one I will choose and how I will proceed and the best solution, how it will be attained. That can be only attained when I have a clear idea of what my problem is, what I want to solve, and out of the multiple ways, which way they have to. So as I told you, it was a high temperature reaction. It was corrosive gases involved. So stability was one important factor. So I took help of which are the materials which are stable in them. Then the mechanism by which it operates means how the reaction proceeds in presence of a catalyst. If I know that, I can select the material which will be most appropriate for that reaction. So we chose several materials and screened them, and the best material we scaled up and gave a possible alternative to some costly catalyst. And it is, as I told you, it is used in a plant. So this is how the problem has to be defined. And if you have a clear-cut definition of the problem, the best possible way you have to find out to solve the given problem or the objectives of your research. So this is the first step in the research process. Definition of the problem. So identification involves identification and formulation of the problem. Identification of selection and formulation of the problem. So let us first go into how we can identify the problem. The research problem undertaken for study must be carefully selected. The task is a difficult one, although it may not appear to be so. So selection of the problem is very critical. As they are mentioning, it is mentioned the task is difficult. Although it appears to, oh, what it is, you have to select a problem, nothing matters. No, it is very important as well as difficult. And for that, you have to take help from a research guide. Okay. Because his experience counts. He can tell you how difficult and how important it is to select the problem, identify the problem which you will solve in a research program. A problem must spring from researcher's mind like a plant springing from its own seed. Your mind is always thinking on the research which you want to do. Similarly, from the seed as the plant comes out, they are giving an analogy that the problem must spring from the researcher's mind in such cases. A research guide can at most only help a researcher choose a subject, but it is the researcher whose thought process is very important for selecting the problem. What are the points you need to remember, or what are the importance points we need to consider in selecting the research problem for a research? That point wise is tabulated here. I will go through this, try to understand. First is negative, what we will not do. Okay. Subject which is overdone. Okay. Some problem which has been extensively studied and already things are established should not be normally chosen. Or it will be a difficult task to throw any new light in such a case. So this is the first point or consideration which you will think which you will consider while selecting your research problem. Means something which is over-investigated. We should not pick up that as our research problem. Okay, because it will be very difficult for you to find out new ideas or new data from that. Second, controversial subject should not become the choice of an average researcher. Okay, we should try to avoid controversial subject. Although somebody who is interested to solve a controversial subject may do so, but in general, for an average researcher, it is proposed that we should avoid such a controversial subject. But definitely, one can go ahead with it. Too narrow or too vague problem should be avoided. As I told you that, okay, my job was to develop a catalyst for a particular reaction so that it can be used in a plant. I could have given the title, the problem in such a way. But I thought, okay, and I selected a specific material only. But in my title, I made it broader so that under that umbrella, I can investigate more materials and more reactions I can investigate. Like that, I'm sure you all must have selected the research problem in a much broader context, although research you are doing in a narrowed down way. But it is always okay and advisable to choose a broader problem. But it should not be too broad that it becomes vague. Okay, so here there is a trade-off. Should not be too broad, narrow, that okay, you can do only a minimal sort of research with only one material. Again, it should not be too broader that everything in the world on that subject comes under it. So we have to do the trade-off, and a good problem is one which has a balance between the two. The subject selected for research should be familiar and feasible. For this purpose, a researcher should contact an expert or a professor in the university who is already engaged in research. So somebody who is starting to do research and trying to create select his or her problem, which he will investigate in his due course of research or solve the problem with a definite objective. He should be aware what are the facilities he can use to solve this problem in the university or nearby places. Because it should not be too over, what I will say. It shouldn't be such that he cannot investigate or do it within the infrastructure of his or her place or nearby place where he has access to. So for that, what you have to do, you have to always discuss with somebody, your guide, or other colleagues in your institute who can give a fair idea, okay, what is available regarding the infrastructure and how much access you can go to other places, other institute, and how much you should propose for your research problem. So that fair idea a new researcher should have before proposing his problem, okay, so that he will have a way out to solve it. The importance of the subject, okay, this is also important. The importance of the subject, the qualifications, and the training of the researcher, the cost involved, the time factor, or few other criteria thus must be considered in selecting a problem. So on that topic, under this heading 5, we cover multiple points. One is importance, qualification and training of the researcher, cost involved, and time factor. These things we discussed initially. So all this should be taken into consideration while proposing the research problem. A researcher must ask himself the following question. Okay. And after this, one should ask himself whether I am equipped in terms of my background to carry out the research. Okay, I am a person in biology. I cannot do something which is exotic in physics. Okay, somebody can do, because I should not tell, okay, you cannot do. But okay, some sort of overlap should be there. Means my background and my topic or problem of research should have some overlap so that I can use my academic background to pursue my research career. Okay. Although I have seen people who have excelled in completely different field. Okay. But it should have some commonality or some overlap with the background. Whether the study falls within the budget available, that you have to consider. Okay. You have an idea how much budget will be available. So whether my problem can be undertaken within that budget, or I can solve it, or I can collect the data within that budget. Whether the necessary cooperation can be obtained from those who must participate in research as subjects. Okay, you ask these questions. If the answer to all these questions are affirmative, means yes, all these questions you have, answer is yes, one may become sure so far as the practicability of the study is concerned. Okay, then you can go ahead. And another thing which may or may not be true, it's important for new sort of research, that is the selection of a problem must be preceded by a preliminary study. Not for familiar areas, but for relatively new areas. So if you remember this point, whether he is well equipped in terms of background to carry out a research, okay. So I told you, I have seen some people who have excelled in some different topics. They have excelled because they did some preliminary study before starting the PhD. Okay. So many of my friends, I'm from chemistry, I've seen many of my friends have excelled in chemical engineering, but she had a prior expertise, 1 or 2 years expertise. He understood, okay, what are the chemical engineering knowledge required to do her research problem. Okay, so some sort of a preliminary study or pre-PhD research can help if you are jumping into a new area. Okay. If the subject for the researcher is selected properly, the research will not be boring. In fact, zest for work is a must. Okay. So the best way research progresses is the zest for work of the researcher. Now coming to the next heading, necessity of defining the problem. So first I have given in red. Quite often we all hear that a problem clearly stated is a problem half solved. Okay, so we already covered what are the points which should be considered for selecting the research problem, and then we discuss 6 points, and then why we need to define the problem. This is what we are studying now. The need is because a problem clearly stated is a problem half solved. So as I was telling you, if you have a clarity on what is the research problem which you are going to solve, then half job is done because you know what you have to do ahead. Okay. This statement signifies the need for defining a research problem. The problem to be investigated must be defined unambiguously. For that, we will help to discriminate relevant data from irrelevant ones. A proper definition of research problem will enable the researcher to be on track, whereas an ill-defined problem may create hurdles. Questions like what data are to be collected, what characteristics of data are relevant and need to be studied, what relations are to be explored, what techniques are used for the purpose, And similar questions crop up in the mind of a researcher who can plan strategy and find answer to all such questions. Only when the research problem has been well defined. And I'm sure all of you have well defined your research problem and you are excelling in your research areas now. Because hope your work is going on good, because you have clearly defined your problem and there only the half job is done, that you know what data to be collected, what are data are relevant and which one are irrelevant, because you have a multitude of techniques which you can, by way you can investigate. Some will be very relevant, some will be okay. You can additionally present those, and some will be irrelevant. So your focus will be how to get the relevant data at the first go. And if you have defined your problem clearly, you will know which one is important, which one is unimportant, and you are definitely collecting the important data. What relations to be explored, what are the theoretical work you want to do, what techniques you will use, and you have clear answers to all of this because you have defined the problem clearly. Okay. So you know what you have to do, even for the one by one topics you are taking, one by one materials or reaction, whatever you are doing, whatever research you are doing, one by one topic you are going ahead and you know what you have to do because you have defined the problem. What are techniques? So, but now coming to the techniques involved in defining a research problem. So, the technique for purpose. The technique for the purpose involves the undertaking following steps, generally one after another. So these are the techniques which one is used. I have given in point wise in this first four, and then we'll explain all these four later on. So we go ahead one by one. Statement of the problem in a general way. Okay. Understanding the nature of the problem. Surveying the available literature. Developing the ideas through discussions and rephrasing the research problem into a working proposition. So there are 5 techniques by which one can define what are the 5 techniques which are involved in defining a research problem. Okay. So those 5 we will discuss in details one by one. First is statement of the problem in a general way. So you have to define the research problem. You have to go to the committee to defend. You have to propose a title for your research. How you will do that? First, you have to give a broad general title for this. Why broad general way? Because you have to keep in view some practical concern or some scientific or intellectual interest has to be preserved. Okay. You will be definitely solving a very precise or focused problem. But we present the problem in a broader way so that, as we told you, we discussed in the previous classes, that, okay, some applied research you are doing, you are solving that problem. But for your intellectual or scientific interest, you can, under the umbrella of a broader picture, you can do some good scientific work for the practical. Okay, but that can contain some ambiguity. I'll come later. The problem stated a broad general way may contain various ambiguity. Okay, it may contain ambiguity because okay, somebody may ask, oh, all right, this is beyond your scope. Why are you including this? Which must be resolved by cool thinking and rethinking over the problem. At the same time, the feasibility of a particular solution has to be considered, and same should be kept in view while stating the problem. For this purpose, the researcher must immerse himself thoroughly in subject matter concerning which he wishes to pose a problem. Often the guide puts forth the problem in general terms, and it is then up to the researcher to narrow it down and face the problem in operational terms. In case there is some directive from the organization authority, the problem can be stated authority. So the technique means we are first is statement of the problem in a broader or general way. Okay, as I told you, okay, the broader things, as you propose it in a broader way, can contain some ambiguities. But if a researcher discusses with the guide, he will tell some general problem which he or she has to solve. Again, sometimes the organization demands that, okay, this is the problem in which we have to work. And it is true for the which we are working. There are definitely so many important problems to be solved during our research course. And it can become very useful. It is our duty, who is doing the research, to immerse ourselves completely into the topic and give the problem a definite or direction to narrow it down in operational terms, which we want to do. But the statement has to be broader. Okay, that doesn't mean, okay, we do some, we know what specific we are going to achieve. We wish that we do all the R&D in that specific area. And if we are sincere and concerning enough, and if we go through those properly, definitely we know what we have to do. Two things which come to mind is the organization and the guide who are proposing us the problem. And we propose it in a general way, but we know we have to. Understanding the origin and nature clearly. Okay. So, nature of the problem and origin of the problem. It has to be very clear cut in the technique by which we are proposing. The best way of understanding the problem is discuss it with those who first raised it in order to find out the problem originally came about and with what objectives in view. If the researcher has stated the problem himself, he should consider once again all those points that induced him to make a general statement concerning the problem. Before finalizing your research problem and research topic, if you have proposed it in consultation with your guide or the organizational demand, you keep on thinking, and by that way you evolve. The topic evolves, and you have fairly a very good broader statement to propose as your research problem. Okay, by that way you understand the origin and the nature of it. Third is very important. Next class will be completely on this. Surveying the available literature. That is a must, which we have to do. The researcher must devote sufficient time in reviewing of research already undertaken on related problems. So this you always have to do. Please neglect what long things we have written. Just try to remember the points. No need. If you need to write one line, it is okay. I'm talking about the exam which you will have later on. Why literature survey is important? Okay, we'll discuss in details in the next class. Just I initiate it. This is done to find out, and you all know what data and other materials, if any, are available for operation purpose. Knowing what data are available often serves to narrow the problem itself as well as the technique that might be used. This would also help a researcher to know if there are certain gaps. This is precisely what we do during the research. Okay, we do an extensive literature survey and we identify the gap areas. And we propose our problem in such a way that the gap areas can be bridged, isn't it? So definitely somebody who is working in catalyst, he knows, okay, this iron has been used, it is showing good activity, but if we make an alloy with iron, how it will show? Have anyone done this? Okay, alloy with iron, cobalt, iron, nickel is there. Can I try with some other materials, iron, copper, how it will behave? So that gap area we try to solve. I'm just giving an illustration. Similar illustrations in materials, in biology, in medicine, in engineering, everywhere exist. And with a thorough literature survey, you can find out the gap areas, and those will help you to propose a problem which is relevant, because you can bridge that gap during your research course. All this will enable a researcher to take new strides in the field of furtherance of knowledge. That is, he can move up starting from existing premise. So, since there is only a gap, there's a starting way already. So he knows where to start from and fill the gap and go to a very good conclusion for his or her research. Developing the ideas through discussions. You have to develop ideas through discussion before proposing. This is one of the techniques. We're discussing the techniques for proposing the research problem. This is I have found during my course of time. Okay, sometimes you may not find it useful or good to discuss, but I have seen discussion concerning a problem often produces useful information. It's written, I would say, very useful information. Definitely, discussion is a must for proposing a research problem with anybody within the field, also other people who, if you present in front of them, especially senior people who has expertise, with their vast expertise, they tend to give you very good suggestions, and which you can include while proposing the research problem. Various new ideas can be developed through such an exercise. By discussion, new ideas definitely can come. Hence, a researcher must discuss his problem with his colleagues. It's very important. Others who have enough experience in the same area or working in similar problems. And I've seen even somebody who is working in other areas, if I present in front of them, is a experienced fellow, he can quickly pick up what I'm doing and where my gap area is, so that I can bridge that. So he or she proposes that, and I have found good solution to this. It is quite often known as an experience survey. People with rich experience are in a position to enlighten the researcher on different aspects of his or proposed study, and their advice and comments are usually invaluable to the researcher. They help him sharpen his focus of attention on specific aspects within the field. And I have also seen that multiple people, see, I do my research with one line of, if I discuss this, my research with people of different fields and my similar fields, I get suggestions of wide variety, wide spectrum, and you also can find it out. And suppose developing a catalyst, a fundamental mechanistic person will give certain ideas. A chemical engineering applied person will give ideas which are different, but also which is relevant. Both of them are relevant in solving the research problem or proposing itself the problem which has a solution which is required in that field. Okay, so discussion with people, experienced people, is a must before proposing a research problem. And that is why the committees are there, the PhD committees, in which you go and present. And after they leave them, they definitely give so many ideas. And that is why the doctoral committees are there, which during the course of a research give the directions. Okay, you are going this way. There is another way, means the alternatives they suggest. And it helps, definitely. It has helped me, and I'm sure it helps you, all of you, for Not only you're selecting the problem, but in due course of your research as well. Then finally, what you have to do? You have to rephrase the research problem. Okay. So you try to finally, after all this, you rephrase your research problem. What is coming right now? Okay, let him in. Finally, researcher must sit to rephrase the research problem into a working proposition. So you have considered all this. You have made the statement in a general way. You have done investigate or studied a lot in your area. You have done enough literature survey. You have discussed with your peers and your seniors, and then you sit back again and rephrase what you have initially proposed in a general way, so that what you propose now after all this will have more clarity after these four techniques. Initially you propose, and after these three techniques, you rephrase it with much more clarity so that you can define or formulate the research problem in a much clearer way. Once the nature of the problem has been clearly understood, now you have clearly understood with this technique, the environment has been defined, discussion over problem has taken place, and available literature has been surveyed and examined. Rephrasing the problem into analytical or operational terms is not a difficult task. Now it becomes simpler to you. Now for you, it's a very easy task to rephrase it and propose a very good statement or research problem which you are going to solve. And then what happens? Through rephrasing, the researcher puts the research problem in a specific terms as possible so that it can become operationally viable. And what it does, it helps on development of the working hypothesis of your research. Okay, this is what is the research problem all about. We discussed in details. In addition, you can keep these points also in mind, but those were the techniques which you must have. These are final editings which you should remember so that your research problem becomes error-free. Technical terms. Okay, catalyst we have, we do heterogeneous catalysis. We have certain technical terms like adsorption, desorption, enthalpy of adsorption, surface area. There are other terms also, non-technical. We avoid using that, and instead use technical terms for that. Similarly, in your research field, with Lockyer literature survey, you should use the term should be technically correct. Its special meaning used in the statement of the problem should be clearly defined. Basic assumption or postulate relating to the research problem should be clearly stated. A straightforward statement of the value of the investigation should be provided. The suitability of the time period, sources of data available must also be considered by researcher in defining the problem. Okay. The scope of the investigation, now voice is diminishing. My voice is really cracking now. But the limits within which the problem is to be studied must be mentioned explicitly in defining the research problem. These are additional, just I went through, it's not so important. Conclusion, but you should remember, okay, specifically the terms, the terminology which you use, the time period which you propose, the sources of data which we use should be clearly stated in the extended research problem. You submit a very big research problem, right? With the abstract and timelines. So what we conclude from today's discussion? We may conclude by saying that the task of defining a research problem very often follows a sequential pattern. What is the sequence? The problem is stated in a general way. Ambiguities are resolved. Thinking and rethinking process results in more specific formulation of the problem so that it can be realistic one in terms of available data and resources to you. and also analytically meaningful. All these results in well-defined research problem. But you end up using this, a well-designed research problem that is not only meaningful from an operational point of view, but is equally capable of paving the way for the development of working hypothesis for the means of solving the problem itself. Okay. So we conclude today that task of defining a research problem is of utmost importance. We should not neglect that. We should not define it, okay, the way it is given in literature, or the way some my guide is telling, or the way, or vaguely what I think. But instead, what things you have to follow a sequential pattern. You have to follow a sequential pattern for defining the research problem. First, you state it in a general way. Then, you study in that field, do extensive research, literature survey, research in the literature, discuss with your peers and seniors in a very open manner, and then rephrase the problem so that finally the problem statement which you propose is clear, operational, and helps you in clearly understanding the working hypothesis which you will solve during your research years. Okay, so this is what we studied today. These are the assignments. These are questions which you can consider from today's discussion. Mention the techniques of defining a research problem. So the techniques, these are the 5 techniques which you should consider while defining a research problem. So we did this. So just ask the question. Mention the techniques of defining the research problem. What is the necessity of defining a research problem? Can you explain? So I explained it here. Means necessity of defining the research problem. Okay. So question and answers all I am giving. Short notes on components of a research problem. Rephrasing the research problem. Okay, rephrasing we understood here. This is what rephrasing after 4 techniques. This is the 5th technique, and these are the components. It's what you should consider. What we research problem. State the points to be considered while selecting a research problem. This also we did here. So the following points being considered by researching and selecting a research problem or a subject for research. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. 6 points. Just point wise. Don't write in extended manner. These are some assignments which you can consider so that just point wise you write, because I know you are all busy with your own research. So, but these points are important. Discussion has been done in detail in class, and if you just rewrite the points, it will be helpful you in remembering and applying it for your research area. Thank you.